Welcome back, everyone. OpenLine. Talking about presidential news. Plenty to talk about. We have this John Bile, MTSU political science professor. Let's go to the phones. We kind of set the table there at the top. All kinds of news. Let's go to Richard. Hello, Richard.
Yeah, I'm here. How are you?
Great. Go right ahead.
My question is, what are the chances of what Mueller's doing becoming a RICO, making it a RICO case, and these guys going to jail, to prison?
What Mueller is doing, could it become a RICO case, and Trump and others going to prison? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, saying that they're found guilty and convicted of this. What are the chances of these, again, becoming a RICO case and these guys actually winding up in jail?
All right. Tell me what a RICO case is.
Well, yeah, I may need some help with that, but I mean, basically, I think it has to do with, conspiracy and the like. The more interesting question, which came up several weeks ago, was whether a president could pardon himself.
Right.
And we don't know. I mean, the Constitution doesn't prohibit it. On the other hand, general principles of justice would say that you shouldn't be a judge in your own case. If you go back to the Nixon precedents, which are probably the closest we would get to, if you go back to the Starr investigation, a few people went to jail, but they were sort of bit players. They didn't tend to be, they were neither the Clintons nor the inner circle there. In Nixon's case, there were some people, of course, and actually because Judge Sirica was willing to apply the law very harshly because he thought he was not getting testimony, he was able to squeeze, some of the witnesses into revealing a wider conspiracy. And, John Mitchell, Attorney General, went to jail, and there were some others. Nixon himself was pardoned in a highly controversial move, but I think the general consensus is that Ford did it because he just saw the country being utterly consumed with whether Nixon was going to go to jail or not, and even his own time was being spent on this that he thought, let's just get it behind us.
Right.
But there were others who said, the principle we established is no man is above the law, and if in fact he's guilty and he's not punished, then he did appear above the law. So, and I mean, I just have no idea at this point if anybody's going to go to jail, because I don't know where the evidence is leading.
It is definitely too early to speculate on that. It
is. I mean, RICO or any crimes for that matter.
News that they did do this this search at Manafort's house would indicate Manafort is certainly somebody they're very focused on.
I think from what little I know at this point, of all the individuals that have been identified, he seems to have the closest links to Russia. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he used them on behalf of the Russians in this particular instance, but he may have. It's illegal, as I understand it, for to participate with foreigners for the purpose of influencing the U.S. election, and I would guess that he would certainly be concerned about that.
It seems unlikely now that Mueller would be fired. So there was concern on the part of some that President Trump would, I guess, appoint a new attorney general, and then the new attorney general would fire the special prosecutor.
And Kelly has sort of given assurances that Sessions is not going to be fired, and it seems very unlikely that he would fire Mueller. Even if asked, he probably would resign rather than, again, you hate to go back because nothing ever is directly parallel, but in the Nixon case, frankly, Nixon probably would have done better had he never fired the special prosecutor Archibald Cox. As soon as he did, his attorney general and assistant attorney general resigned, and then people became, when the new one was appointed, Leon Jaworski, he had even greater authority than the individual that that succeeded. So I don't think that Mueller's going to be fired. If he were to be, there would fire and fury. The fire and fury that was supposed to be directed at North Korea might very well be directed at the administration.
That's one of those cases where Republicans stood up. They said stop treating stop treating Jeff Sessions
well, Elliot Richardson, you're saying in this case, that's right. And some more than others. Lindsey Graham, John McCain have certainly been very strong supporters of Sessions. But remember, Sessions, not many months ago was a U.S. senator.
Right.
And it does appear that even senators who are not particularly ideologically aligned with him generally believe that he's an individual of integrity.
When you look at history, how often do special prosecutors come up with nothing? Ken Starr obviously came up with something, right?
Well,
it was something totally different than what he was
well, if you go to the Iran-Contra thing, I mean, you sort of came up with something, but, North ended up being convicted, and then his conviction was overturned, as I recall, because it was thought that there had been improper evidence leaked from the Congress to the prosecutor and so forth. The irony is we really know, we actually eliminated the special prosecutor office. It was allowed to lapse after the Starr investigation, and there was sort of a consensus. I think both sides were sort of exhausted.
Right.
Democrats had gone their way with Nixon, and Republicans had sort of retaliated with Clinton. And a lot of people said, the problem with going with prosecution is, the people have elected, they've made electoral choices here, and if everybody you elect then gets thrown out on the basis of what could be partisan prosecutions, that doesn't work so well. And yet, there was something. We still have this problem that the Attorney General is a cabinet officer who's accountable to the president, and accountability generally means that a person can fire you. And what do you do in the case where an Attorney General is tasked with investigating something within his own office or within the president's office? And that, that's just one of those, it's sort of like trying to square the circle. It's one of those anomalies of separation of powers that, we're sort of stuck with coming up with mechanisms on the fly. And we can call it a special counsel instead of special prosecutor, but amounts pretty much to the same thing.
And so here we sit, knowing that this investigation is going forward, because we saw that Manafort, his home was searched. I just wonder what is going to happen when it's over. There's going to be half the people that are going to be unhappy here, in a sense. There are a lot of people on the left who think there's no doubt there's been a crime, and thank goodness it's being investigated. There are people on the right that think this is an overreach and making up for an election, that Democrats feel like they should have won or whatever. Both sides feel very partisan sort of views about this. So what happens when it's over to the country? It's going to have to end one way or the other.
One of the things that I think helped in the Watergate situation, and maybe I'm going back to my childhood here, but the public was, some drag kicking and screaming, others fairly willingly. There was enough evidence on the public record, even before you had the special prosecutor, to know that something was amiss. And in some ways, I'm grateful that we haven't had open congressional hearings before we actually know, if the smoke actually represents a fire. But at some point, the public needs to be brought into how serious are the charges and who do they involve. And I think that the key to a perception of fairness is a prosecutor going to be able to distinguish between people who, if they exist, who willingly colluded, perhaps for money or for other baser interests, against their own government, and how many people just happened to be in the same room, really did not have any involvement. And I think if everybody in the whole administration is indicted, then I think there are going to be great suspicions. If people are able to say, well, this person seems to have culpability and this does not, that I think would give a little bit more indication of fairness.
And I guess what I'm also getting at is the notion of facts now. You know, do you think in this environment that we are in, we can agree on facts?
Well, it's getting harder, isn't it? And you know, the president who had, you know, one president, ironically, who really wasn't the subject of special prosecution, although there were all kinds of negative books at the time and allegations, was Lyndon Johnson. I mean, if ever there was a political operator, you know, it was him. But even though he never was prosecuted, and I don't know that he did anything legally wrong, but you know, there developed during his administration what was known as a credibility gap. And I guess my great fear right now in the Trump administration is that gap is already, in my judgment, greater than it was under Lyndon Johnson, and we're only a little over 6 months in. You know, Trump, and again, in my judgment, but you know, I think I have some evidence to back it up. You know, when in the very first week you send your press secretary out to make a claim that seems contradicted by the photographic evidence, you might do that once or twice, but and the great fear, of course, is, you know, what if, you know, probably we're not. But what if we are on the verge of war in Korea, or, you know, something that we haven't quite seen before? Will we rally around the president because, after all, he's our president and we elected him, or are we going to say, is this being done as a diversion? Can we trust, you know, and you know, someone is George W. Bush, that my own assessment would be that he was mistaken, but that probably, you know, thought he had the facts on his side. You know, turned out the weapons of mass destruction that they thought were going, you know, none other than Colin Powell had argued for this. They didn't end up being there. And, you know, what if there's a greater suspicion that not only did you not assess the facts correctly, but you doctored them? And, you know, hopefully we won't get to that point.
Hopefully we won't. All right, let me take one call. Then I'm going to take a break, and then we're going to take a bunch of calls. Well, let's just go to Kathy. Hello, Kathy?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Yes. My question is in regards to the U.S. rep out of Florida, Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yes.
And what has been in some of the media lately in regards to the Pakistani national that some of the reps had hired to do their IT work, and the FBI had arrested him at an airport a couple weeks ago. Can you elaborate on any of that?
Unfortunately, I cannot. I mean, I know that she is one that, you know, during the Clinton campaign, remember there was, you know, there was considerable controversy over her, and she became sort of a partisan lightning rod. You know, I guess the one thing without knowing much else to say is congressmen hire a lot of people, and you know, I don't know this particular incident, but it's always possible that you could hire somebody who would, you know, get in trouble on their own. I think the question would be, is she behind it? And
right.
You know, I don't know enough about the story to know.
And I don't believe well, yeah.
I mean, I would find it hard to believe that
she's not. She was chair of the Democratic Party. She's no longer
right.
chair of the Democratic Party. There's no question about that. Yeah, there are a lot of people saying, why aren't we prosecuting Hillary Clinton? So that's something that you're hearing on the right. And Donald Trump himself, once he was elected, said, let's not do that.
He did. He changes his mind every now and then. But
now he's saying we should do it.
Yes.
You know, she's not president.
No, she's not.
You know, I think that's part of it.
Right.
You know, she's not president. If she were president, maybe. But she's not president. So, you know, I don't know. We don't generally prosecute the losers of presidential elections.
I would have been much more concerned about this raid on Manafort if it had occurred under a Democratic president's watch than if it's occurring under a Republican president's watch.
Right. Because we don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Kathy. Thank you for the call. We're going to take a break, and then I'm going to go through a bunch of calls. We have several calls here. We'll take a break. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.